Testing. Okay. All right. All right. We're at 12:01. Ed, what do you say we get started? Sound good to you?
Sounds good.
All right. So let me see if I can. All right. So we're all in the right place. This is move that out of the way. PMI NEO's presentation, thanks to IIL, of common project manager mistakes. I'll introduce our speaker in just 1 second. I did just ignore the top part of the slide. Ed did say that if we do have questions, by all means, put them in the chat, and I will try my best to monitor that. Andy's going to help me out, I'm sure, and we will gently make make it aware of the question as we go. So if you do have questions, by all means, throw it in the chat, and he'll answer them as we move along here, and we will have PDU information. I don't have it with me, and so it'll follow on to all our registered attendees. So look for an email after the fact. Okay, now I get the pleasure of introducing our speaker. Ed Lively is a senior training and development consultant with extensive experience in project management, training, and leadership. With over 19 years at the International Institute of Learning, Ed teaches 52 different classes across negotiation, project management, and team leadership. Ed holds multiple certifications, including PMP, CSM, CSPO, and various Microsoft certification. Ed holds a patent for item banking and authoring software and has co-authored multiple books on dynamic scheduling with Microsoft Project. When not working, Ed enjoys scuba diving, flying, and horseback riding. So pretty much up, down, and everywhere in between is kind of how I'm seeing that, Ed.
Very good. Thank you very much for that introduction.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and I'll let you share.
Okay.
Oops, stop share, Dominic.
Thank you very much for that, Dominic.
Sure.
And I assume you can see my slide now?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Um, yes, and I think that I have now over 20 years. I need to update that slide. 20 years of working with the International Institute for Learning, and I've had the pleasure of visiting 28 countries and teaching in those countries. And now, as I was explaining, since the pandemic, I'm doing almost all online training these days. So thank you very much for inviting me in today. And the topic, as you said, was common project manager mistakes. And believe me, in the past 40 years, I've made most of them. So we're going to talk about choosing right projects to work on. We're going to discuss reasons for project failure, which include things like poor requirements, dysfunctional teams, poor planning, the correlation to failed projects and risk, failed projects correlating to poor change control. And then at the end of this, we'll talk about strategies to recover from a troubled or failing project. As Dominic said, please, if you have any questions or comments, you're welcome to put them in the text chat. At the end of this, you're welcome to ask me out loud questions if you have them. I enjoy the conversations. You probably all know this, but a project is defined as a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product, service, or result. The three important things in this that I teach my students is that it has to be temporary. It has to have a definite start and a definite finish. If it's ongoing, it's something else. It's not a project. It could be a program, but it's not a project if it's ongoing all the time. It needs to be unique from operations, unique from other projects that you work on. It may be very similar to other projects you work on, but something about it is different. The content, the technology, the client, the team. and it produces something, a product, service, or result. I like to start off every class with that definition because a lot of things that people use Microsoft Project or Primavera for are not really projects. They're ongoing initiatives. We're going to look at problems in each of these areas, the triple constraints, time, cost, scope, quality, and we're going to add risks to that. Does anybody ever figure out why we call it the triple constraints and there are really four constraints? Time, cost, scope, and quality? I still stay awake wondering about that. We're going to talk about the importance of achieving project objectives, value delivered, stakeholder satisfaction, and customer acceptance. And these are the definitions of success for project management. Many years ago, it was meeting the triple constraints, being on time, within budget, and meeting the requirements of the project. Then we added customer satisfaction to that. And later we add a subsection of customer satisfaction called fitness for use. But today, the real measure of success is benefits realization, or you could say value realization if you'd like. Because you can be on time within budget, meeting the requirements, but if you don't get the benefits that were promised in the business case, then you really can't say it was a success. Okay, let's look at some statistics here. The Bureau of Economic Analysis in 2010, that's the most recent information I have on it, said the U.S. public and private sectors combined to spend approximately 2.3 trillion on projects every year. This number is approximately 25% of the United States gross domestic product. That's quite a bit. 84% of companies either do not conduct business cases for their projects or perform them on selected key projects. And that's too bad because starting with a business case, there's always some thought that's gone into that. And that thought should, more and more project managers are being asked to start earlier on projects and get involved with the business case and some of the discussions with the clients so that they know the background on why they're doing the project they're doing. 89% of companies are flying blind with no metrics in place except for financial data. Now, there's an old adage in project management that says if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And there's a lot of truth to that. I am constantly amazed that when I talk to people about their schedules and I say, when did you set the baseline? And they go, what's a baseline? How can you measure variance if you don't have a baseline to compare the actuals to? "84% of companies are unable to adjust and realign their budgets with their business needs." Choosing the right project is extremely important and making sure you're ready to go to market because a lot of money goes into the development of these kinds of projects. Just look at them: Blockbuster, BlackBerry, Kmart, America Online, Kodak. You know, can you find these companies anymore? I haven't seen them in a while. The right kind of company has a broader appeal. Oh, uh, Einstein said, we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created the problems. But we do that in project management. We keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And I think you know what that's the definition of: insanity. Some of the right projects that we've seen out there where they've done a good study and they continue to develop those products and make them better year after year are Uber. You know, no matter where I teach in the world, there's an Uber. Thank God, because, I don't have an international driver's license and driving in some countries, I know I'd get in trouble. Airbnb is another one. If you travel a lot, this is a great way to stay and enjoy, especially with large families. eBay, still going strong out there. When we begin to work on projects, we begin by having the projects that the enterprise is considering to go through a governance and selection process. This is where all the proposals, along with their justification for doing the project, the business case, go through a selection process. And the primary selection criteria is, does it address our strategic objectives? In addition to that, there are some other things. There are regulatory requirements, maintenance requirements, and based on the fact, do we have alignment with the strategic objectives? If we don't, we reject it very quickly. If it does align, but we don't have the resources for that project, then we backlog those projects or waitlist them. And if we have the resources and it aligns to one of these criteria, then we accept that project. This ensures that every project that we work on is aligned to the same direction that the company's going in. Many of you know that your company hands you the strategic objectives of the company so that you can align your personal objectives with those strategic objectives. Okay. When I was with Harcourt Assessment, the testing company in the US that was part of Reed Elsevier before they sold it off, they had a red shirt team. And the purpose of the red shirt team was to take over troubled projects or to work with the existing team to get those projects up and going again. And we're going to talk about how we do that because a lot of the failure points in the way we manage projects lead to troubled or failing projects. Troubled projects just don't happen. There is signals telling you that you're about to head into trouble, but frequently we ignore those signals. I don't know. Maybe it's perhaps we don't like to give bad news to our executives. We always look at the sunny side of things. But they just don't happen out of thin air. And they don't go from being green one day to being red the next day. So the monitoring and controlling of our product is in question here. And we should know what some of these clues are that are leading us down the wrong path. So right now, if you would, in the text chat, put some notes in there about what clues you might see that you're headed into a troubled project. Go ahead and just type the kinds of things that are signals that you might be starting a troubled project. High turnover. Yeah, exactly. People getting sick all the time too. Exceeding some of our metrics. Unclear objectives. No communication. Expenditures outpacing. No scope. Unable to catch some of the mistakes happening. You're going so fast, I can barely read this. Under delivering and sometimes over delivering can be a sign of problem. Quality in project management is meeting the requirements, not exceeding them, because that leads to exceeding our budget and exceeding our timeline. Budget's not approved. Changes in priority. Yeah, pulling resources off of one project and putting them onto another project. And not having a good change control process, right? New priorities. Scope creep, part of not having a good change control process. By the way, scope creep is not the only bad dude in the neighborhood. There's also feature creep and resource creep. But a lot of times that comes from scope creep. All right, so Let's take a look at some clues on variance from project baselines versus current plan constraints. We have baselines in every aspect of the project. You can see it visibly in a schedule, typically with scheduling software, but you also have other baselines. The baseline for cost is your approved budget. The baseline for risk is the approved appetite for risk in the organization. So just about everything has a baseline with it. And believe it or not, managing a project is a lot like flying an airplane. In my first airplane, I had 6 gauges. And my instructor pilot told me to look at each gauge for 1 second and look out the window and continue the scan through all the gauges. Well, good monitoring and controlling of a project is the same way. We need to look at our gauges for time, cost, scope, quality, risk, resources, stakeholders, and so forth, and take corrective action when we see something. Here's some additional statistics. In the US, more than 250 billion a year is spent on just IT application development. And that accounts for about 175,000 projects. The average cost of a development project for a large company, which blew me away, is almost 2.5 million. In a small company or a medium company, it's almost 1.5 million. And for a small company, it's almost 500,000. Okay. The Standish Group that publishes the Chaos Report periodically on different subjects shows that 31% of projects will be canceled before they ever get completed. Further results indicate 53% of projects will cost over 100% of their original estimates. In fact, it's almost 200% of their original estimates. On the success side, the average is closer to 16% for software projects that are completed on time and within budget. In larger companies, the news is even worse. Only 9% of their projects come in on time and within budgets. Projects completed by the largest American companies have only approximately 42% of the originally proposed features and functions. That doesn't sound promising. PMI did a study where they said that 149 million was lost for every 1 billion spent on strategic initiatives due to poor project performance. I think part of that too is that some companies don't look at their strategic objectives and try and develop projects that address those strategic objectives. There are a lot of pet projects that go in. So in the text chat again, give me an idea of what you think makes a project fail. What are the key reasons? Try and pick the major reasons for project failure based on your experience. Competing priorities, poor planning, goes over budget, stakeholder expectations, wrong resources are engaged, scope creep, not collecting all stakeholder requirements. You know, how many of you have had that situation where in the 11th hour of your project, when you're about to finish it, someone shows up in one of your meetings that you've never seen before with requirements you've never heard anything about? Okay. It happens. If it hasn't happened to you yet, one day it will. No clear key performance indicator definitions. Business changes, not paying attention to the business environment and how it might affect your projects. Very good. Permitting delays. Workmen, work stream leads who were voluntold they needed to participate. Yeah. You really need to get buy-in from your resources on projects. So let's take a look at those 5 areas that provide reasons for projects that fail. Okay. Think about this. The Standish Group again, their recent survey of 175,000 IT projects reported that 88% of those projects run over schedule and over budget or both. The average cost overrun is 89% of the original estimate. Average time overrun is 22% of the original estimate. For every 100 projects, there are approximately 94 of those that have to be restarted. Okay. Hey, I'm just as guilty. 40 years ago, when I started doing projects, that patent that I have on item banks. Item bank is a database that feeds an electronic testing system. In that, the company had hired me just for that project initially, and they had a budget of $10,000 because they thought they were going to buy an off-the-shelf product that handled their needs. Well, after getting there, I told them that there is no such animal out there that's standard that would work with all the different states that we have to prepare tests for. So I hired a programmer who developed the product. The final cost on that was $100,000. You talk about it's easier to ask forgiveness than to get permission. That was definitely my attitude at that time. And I expected to be let go after it. But the truth was that became a shelf product for us. And it was a new product that we sold to a lot of different states. We would take their data, clean it, and put it into these item banks. So it turned out to be a moneymaker for us. The number one reason back in 1999 for failed projects was poor or missing requirements. Okay. We failed to find all the stakeholders, and stakeholders are where we get our requirements from, or at least part of them. Here you see, and this was taken from the Standish report, the chaos report that looked at project failure. And you can see here approximately 80% of project failures were due first to incomplete user requirements and then second to lack of resources. Other reasons for failure were unrealistic expectations, lack of executive support, changing requirements, changing priorities, as someone said earlier, lack of planning, the need expired, lack of functional support, and technological illiteracy. If you're working on a long project in particular, a lot of the executives that sponsor some of the projects can't agree on what the project should do. Should it improve on something that's there? Should it create a new, better project? Is less better or is more better? Who are we trying to satisfy? Is it user friendly? Is it portable? Is it faster? You'll see that these are a lot of things that are required in today's products. And it's hard to try and satisfy all those at one time. Another key reason that projects fail is not having in mind what the objective is for the project. If you don't have a business case, and in a business case, one of the first things you list is the objectives. And like all objectives, we should make them specific, measurable. They have to have metrics. Otherwise, how do we know if we're on track or starting to slip off of the baseline? They need to be attainable within the constraints of the project. And I don't like the word uh, realistic. I prefer the word relevant. Relevant, they should be addressing the strategic objectives of the organization. And the projects that dedicate the most of their benefit to a strategic objective should be the ones we're choosing. You also want to have met milestones listed ahead of time, major milestones that you want to hit. It needs to be time bound. Number two reason, sometimes we have a dysfunctional team. Whose faults, if you're going to point fingers, where do you point the fingers for having a dysfunctional team? I don't know about you. Yeah, I look at the project manager, the captain of the team, right? So, what kinds of things can you think of that would indicate a dysfunctional team? This, I think, is easier than identifying the keys to a high performing team. Lack of commitment, functional managers sometimes lack commitment, internal politics, missing deadlines, lack of integration across the team. By the way, on that one comment about the department managers and the project managers being in contest with each other for the same resources, remember this: operations is about keeping the lights on, business as usual, okay, the day to day work. And projects, if they do nothing else, bring about change in an organization. To be sustainable, you have to have both. So you have to learn to build good relationships with the line managers. Okay? The better your working relationship with them, the easier it's going to be to share those resources. Skill gaps. Okay, very good. Uh, Competing priorities again, not listening. Yeah, and some things I can think of are clicks, collusions, backstabbing. These are things that the project manager should identify and deal with. So here are some others: poor communications, unclear objectives, skill shortfalls, as you mentioned, unclear roles and responsibilities. You need a RAM chart, a responsibility assignment matrix, a RACI, a RACIC, a PARIS, a PERIO, whatever acronym you want to use. Power struggles, personality issues, different standards of performance, definitely. And with teams consisting of people from around the world, that happens more often now than it used to. Or leadership. You know, I don't know about you, but I'm sure that some of you have taken leadership classes. And the thing that I've noticed about a lot of leadership classes that I've been involved in is that they spend a lot of time talking about the characteristics of a good leader, but they don't tell you how to go out and actually do it. And so there are three things I think a leader needs to do at the very beginning. One, well, first of all, they need to build good relationships with people, but they need to create a vision. People need to know where they're going. Okay? In the military, it's referred to as the commander's intent before a battle. Or if you do some sophisticated reading, Alice in Wonderland, where the Cheshire Cat says to Alice, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. But people need to know where they're supposed to end up. Number two, you need to communicate that vision in an unambiguous way. Have any of you ever played the game? In the United States, it's called telephone. Some parts of the world, it's called wacky telephone. Some places, it's called whispers or Chinese whispers, where you turn to the person next to you and you whisper a phrase in their ear, and then they turn to another person and whisper a phrase in the ear. Have you all played that before? Seriously? Okay. You have some people that have. Does the message ever come out the way it went in? No, it doesn't. And that's what happens when a leader tells someone else to tell someone else to tell someone else what the vision is. You end up with 20 versions of the vision out there, and only one of them might be correct. Oh, here's one of my favorite stories. There once were four people named everybody, somebody, and anybody, and nobody. There was an important task or job to be done, and everybody was sure that somebody would do it. Anybody could have done it, but nobody did it. Somebody got angry about that because it was everybody's job. Everybody thought anybody could do it. It ended up that everybody blamed somebody when nobody did what anybody could have done. Certain truth to that. I'm sure that a lot of you have seen the Jensen-Tuckman model for team formation. The emphasis on this, if you look at Covey's situational leadership underneath it, is that in the beginning of the project, you need high levels of direction until they know what's going on in the project. And then you need maybe less direction and eventually self-direction. But you also, during the periods of conflict, you need high support. You can't tell your team not to have conflict. There's good conflict, cognitive conflict, where you're focused on the issues, as opposed to um, personal conflicts. I mean, think about it. Those of you that have siblings, did your parents tell you not to uh, fight with your siblings? Did you stop fighting with your siblings forever? No. My brother and I just went places where our parents couldn't see us fight. And that's what'll happen. You know, people will go somewhere where the manager can't manage it productively. So through each of these stages, we need direction and we need support, especially at the end when you're adjourning the project, because a lot of people may not know if they've got a job to go back to in their department if it's been a long project. Okay, let's look at poor planning. Okay, you think you're going to be able to get that elephant into that horse trailer? I don't think so. He's slightly bigger than any quarter horse I've ever ridden. So we need to do the amount of planning. Someone asked me in one of my classes when I talked about doing the business case, doing the charter, doing the requirements, the scope statement, the work breakdown structure, the RAM chart, the schedule, and the budget, and putting together the project management plan overall with all the 10 subsidiary plans. They said, is all this documentation really needed? And my first answer is no. It depends on the size and complexity of the project because tailoring is a big part of project management, knowing how to size it for the complexity and length of the project. That's important. We don't do as much on simple, short projects as we do on long, complex projects. But the other part of it is when you fill out these forms or create these documents, they tell you what you don't know about your project and that you should go and find out. If there's a blank on a form you can't fill in, you should find out what goes in that. It helps you know what you should know before you're starting your project. I love this. My undergraduate degree was in microbial physiology and mathematics. And I love sciences because they took something that was really complex and modeled it so it was easy to understand. Project management, on the other hand, took something that was easy to understand and blew it all out of proportion. And developing the WBS is a good example of this. Even look at the definition, a deliverables oriented hierarchical decomposition of the project. Why don't they just say how you eat a whale, one bite at a time? How you chunk down the work to a level that's easy enough to estimate at. Instead, they give you 5 steps here that you should follow. And it's good steps when you open up a proposal or a contract and you're trying to identify what the work breakdown structure is going to look like. You have to do analysis. You have to classify some things as phases, some as deliverables, some as activities in a work package. You have to make sure you've got all the work and only the work of the project included in the WBS. And then you look to optimize it. Here's a simple WBS. Okay. I have usually phases at the top. Then I break it down to deliverables. And this is kind of strange because they have work package. To me, a work package by definition is the lowest level of the WBS, which is usually the deliverable, the task to do the deliverable, and a milestone marking the end of the deliverable. That whole thing is it, but they show it as two things here. And the work package they're referring to here are the activities or the tasks to do the deliverables. Now, if I was going to build an aircraft, it would be different. Okay. Instead of phases, I would have components. I would have the tail section, the empennage, the landing gear, the engine compartment, the interior compartment, then subcomponents like the uh, dashboard and a sub-component, maybe the avionics, maybe the radio in that, the GPS. So it just depends on what kind of project you have. I like this arrangement because I use my WBS, I insert it right into my project schedule. When I finish my WBS, I'm automatically finished with my schedule. And by the way, if you're interested in that, let me put in the text chat a place to go look. It's www.criticaltools.com. And their product is WBS Schedule Pro. If you work on large projects, this is a great way to involve your team online and a quick way to develop a WBS. And it imports directly into Microsoft Project, or you can export it to Word or Excel. If you don't, I think it's like $199. If you don't like that, you can use Excel, build a template in Excel. And then you can import that into Microsoft Project. Map it to project fields. Risk management. Now, risk management in particular, but a lot of the documents in project management, people think they do it once and that's all they have to do. They say it's listed as a good practice, so let's do it, and then we don't have to look at it again. Wrong. Projects, if they're nothing else, they're dynamic. They're done in not a static environment, but a very dynamic environment. Things are always changing. So are risks, and you should have a schedule for risk management. You should have yeah, that's kind of a warning sign. I don't know what's on the other side of all that dust or that cloud, but it could be, the bridge to, I don't know, Niagara Falls. You need to be careful, not just yield, not just slow down, but maybe stop and crawl through it. But in risks, you should have a schedule for how often you look at things. For instance, every week during your status meetings, maybe having uh, people look to see if there are any emerging risks that have just popped up that you didn't know at the beginning. You need to add those to your risk register. Maybe you've had a risk already happen and you need to know if the response plan for that risk worked. Maybe it happened or it passed the time for it to happen and it's not going to happen anymore. Take it off your risk register. And then constantly reevaluate the probability and the impact and alter those numbers in your risk register if you get a better understanding. I get a question all the time. People ask me in my classes, will I ever get over the nervousness when I'm assigned to a project? I wonder if I've got the intelligence, the skills to manage this kind of project. And I tell them, after 40 years, I still get nervous when I'm handed a new project because at the beginning of the project, you don't know everything there is to know about it. But as you move through the project, you learn more and more about it until you finish the project, and then you know everything there is to know about the project. So your risk register should be identified, and you should take it through these steps, these phases of risk assessment, risk management are the same no matter what industry you're in. You've got to have a risk management plan, a narrative of how you're going to manage risks on your team. You're going to need to identify risks, analyze risks both qualitatively and perhaps quantitatively, plan a response for those risks, implement that response, and then monitor those risks to make sure the response works. How many people do that? How many people do it all the way through? Oh, this is a good one. You know that we talked about scope creep as being a bad neighborhood. Scope creep being those unapproved changes that happen to your project, either because the client requests it or your team requests it or something else happens. And that usually leads to a lot of different problems, including going over budget and taking longer to do the project than you originally planned. But you really, if there isn't a change control process in place, this is a great place to show off your skill and create a process. You need some forms like a scope change request form and a place to put the impacts of the change to time, cost, scope, quality, risk, and resources. Anytime you make a change to the project, you have to consider those 6 competing demands. Then you need a risk log to log the request in. And then you should have a change control board, whether that's one person, 10 people, maybe it's the same people that approved the project in the first place, but they have to either approve, deny, or postpone the change. That response gets entered into the change log. Then if it's approved, you change your documentation to fit the change and you communicate that change to everybody on your team, all your stakeholders. It's that easy. That easy. Some people ask me, well, do you have to put it through the process for every change? And I say, well, it's a good idea. And they say, what if you're not going to change them for it? I said, do you really want that to be your responsibility to decide to do it and not charge for it? Or should that go to the change control board and say it's sales, your marketing department? Maybe they should make the decision not to charge the client for the changes. The client, if you ask them, is always going to say, well, this is no big deal. It shouldn't take you very long to do it. They have no idea what's involved sometimes. There are going to be changes. That we know. There always is. I've never seen a project that doesn't have changes. In fact, if you do any of you know people that don't know what they want until they see it being built? Okay, my wife is one of those people. Okay, we did landscaping. She had me She had a map of where she wanted all the bushes, and the minute she saw where they all went and I put them in the ground, she said, I really don't like this. Could you move it around? That was one of the longest days of my life. But that's what Agile is for. When you don't know clear requirements, because you're doing it in short bursts, time boxed periods, 1 to 4 weeks, an average of 2 weeks, where you're meeting with the customer at the end of that, the product owner, and the development team gets with them and shows them what they've done in that 2 weeks. And the client has the ability to say, yeah, I like that, but I'd like you to do this instead. And then you do that backlog refinement or that grooming the backlog and go back and alter the features in the product backlog. Traditional projects are good for traditional things that have always been done a certain way, and the requirements are very well known. Things like construction, where they give you the requirements up front, they go off, you build it, and then at the end, they either approve or request some changes. In traditional projects, the goal is keeping with the requirements. In Agile, it's customer satisfaction predominantly. In managing change, okay, we first need a scope statement with SMART objectives in it. We need a process for collecting and approving changes. And we need to do some analysis on the request, how we're going to approach the change. Make sure we understand the change first from the client. Maybe do a 5 whys. Those of you that are parents know about 5 whys. Your toddler probably said, Mom, Dad, why is the grass green? And your answer is probably because God made it that way. The next question is, why did God make it that way? Well, so it could utilize sunshine for fuel. Well, why does it need to use sunlight for energy? And then you just go into deep details about the chlorophyll cycle and explain it to them in very technical terms so they don't ask you anymore. Or you say, it is because it is, just because. You look at the impacts, time, cost, scope, quality, risk, and resources. You look to make sure that it's still the same vision as you start out with. And consequences of doing or not doing the change, that goes along with the impacts, I think. And then we approve, disapprove, or postpone and put it into the change log. Okay, so the last part of this is, how do we recover from a failing project? Okay, and we look at it in 3 stages. Stakeholder realignment first, recovery blueprint, and repairs and restoration. Okay, we ask ourselves, does it need realization of the existing vision, or do we need to remediate it? In stakeholder realignment, when I take over a project from another team or I'm there to help them, the first thing I have to do is look and see what their charter looked like, what their scope statement, the requirements, and if there's any missing documentation, this is where I have to recreate it and verify that I understand it well and make sure that it's being communicated in a singular fashion. Then I think about how I'm going to recover this project. I may have to make some changes to it and get approval from my stakeholders. And then I put that into play and I make sure that everything we've talked about here, I do. In here, and if you're sitting at your own laptop, you can take screenshots of this that you like. But these are some of the activities of getting ready to recover. You do your research. You make sure that you've got metrics. You analyze gaps that you have in this project. Look at the clues and the causes. Where are we headed? And document the case for recovery and get approval And you can see the tools that we use on the right side. The next step is that we have to realign the stakeholders, identify key stakeholders. Who are our stakeholders in a simple assessment that have high power and high concern with our project? Those are the ones we're most concerned with, and we manage those people closely. We develop a plan for each kind of stakeholder. It says we try to get the hot spot. I like to say it's the sweet spot with them, how I'm going to communicate with them, how I build the relationship with them. I communicate the plan and engage the project team. And then I engage all the stakeholders. Stakeholders with high power but low concern, I treat them like all executives. I keep them satisfied. If they ask for something, I give it to them. If they have low power but high concern, I make sure they've got all the information they need to follow the leaders. And if they have low power and low concern, well, some people say forget about them. But the best thing to do is monitor them because they could acquire more power or become more informed, more concerned with the project. So I need to move them from where I thought they were to another location in my stakeholder assessments. Next, I need a recovery blueprint. I have to come up with all the options because you've heard it before. When you take a problem to an executive, they say that you should take your solution to them as well as the problem. As a chief financial officer for 6 years, I'm going to say that I ask for something more than that. I want to know your problem. I want to know all the alternatives you considered, and I want to know which alternative you picked as the answer. Anything less than that, you're asking me to do your job for you. Now, I can look at the alternatives. I might offer some new ones. I might suggest a different alternative than what you came up with, but we can at least have an intelligent conversation about it. We focus on the realistic options that you bring me, and we adapt the approach to the circumstances. In other words, if it's a major project with troubled components, I'm going to treat it one way. If it's a desperately troubled project, there are other things I'm going to do. If there are smaller, multiple troubled projects, yet another approach is going to be necessary there. And I define the categories and how you fall into it. Okay. Repairs and restoration. This is where I actually put the plan into play. And you could use, the short cycle, plan, do, check, act, or plan, do, study, act. I like Agile because Agile builds in do, check, and act into the process of Agile. It's built in the daily scrums if you're doing Scrum. It's built into the sprint review and the retrospectives or the lessons learned. Okay, so in this webinar, we've talked about some of the reasons for project failure, and we've talked about how to address them. We've talked about the problem of poor requirements, dysfunctional teams, poor planning, problems with risk assessment, having a status risk assessment instead of a dynamic one, and problems related to not having a good change control system. And then recently, we just talked about the stages for recovery of a troubled project. This is an area that a project management office can develop experts in taking over or helping with troubled projects. Not every troubled project do I step in and take over for it. Sometimes the existing team is the best to stay there. You just need to coach them a little bit. Okay, that brings me to the end of my presentation, and I imagine getting close to the end of our time. Are there any questions you'd like to ask? And please do. Make me work for my money.
I am not seeing anything in the chat right now, but we'll give people a couple seconds to put stuff in there. And feel free to unmute and ask the question.
You bet. I like talking to people.
Everybody's eating their lunch and their mouths are full.
Well,
Okay.
thank you very much.
Yeah,
Go
Ed,
ahead.
a real pleasure. Thank you for that. And I'll wrap up with just a couple of slides. So if people
Thank
just
you all very much.
thank you, Ed.
Thank you, Ed.
And let me just share real quick. Appreciate all that. Give me one more second here to find my share. That. And hopefully we're back to my PowerPoint. Is that right?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, we did all that. So I think I mentioned we'll have the PDUs for this in the next couple of days sent directly to you, and we also are recording this, and we'll have that available as well. And reminds me.
There was one question about, are the slides available? Unfortunately, they're not, but if you play the recording and take screenshots of those slides that you find interesting, that would be okay.
Yeah, we will have the recording, so they could do that. Exactly. And that's an old one. Okay, just some upcoming chapter meetings and events. We have ongoing our PMI NEO office hours, which are drop-in sessions for any kind of questions you might have, maybe something at work or something you're trying to do, either maybe you're prepping for something project management related, or you have a situation at work or an opportunity at work, and you're looking for some quick advice there. We have those drop-in sessions. And we have our get to know the chapter monthly sessions as well. So if you're new to the chapter, been around for the chapter for a while, or interested in chapter, you don't have to be a member to sit in on this session just to learn about what the chapter does, what the chapter offers, and how the chapter operates. Those are both monthly. And then upcoming chapter meetings include another PMI NEO meetup, which are just micro networking events. If you happen to be downtown on June 26th, there's some folks headed to the day game at Progressive Field, and there'll be a quick meetup at the Thirsty Parrot. Even if you're not going to the day game, if you happen to be around downtown at noon, stop by the entrance of the Thirsty Parrot for a quick micro networking event. We have another meeting on risk management and projects for projects and programs. That's a virtual event. Another social event coming up at the Guardians game at Progressive Field on the 14th, and then a summer family picnic on the 23rd. So please visit the website for more information on any of those events. And of course, we are celebrating our 35th year as a chapter with a special event in September. It's a casino night. Registration is open. It would be a very fun event, and I encourage everybody to attend and register. Should be a fun night of just social networking and celebrating our 35th year as a chapter. And thank you, everybody. And again, thank you, Ed, very much.
Thank you for inviting the International Institute for Learning in.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.